now I can continue. So our event today intends to create and promote a conversation about how academic institutions and also industries, they can adopt measures to support women in achieving career success for a more equal and socially just academic environment. In this way, what we want today in this event is to examine the intersection of multiple inequalities with a specific focus on gender, age, race, disability, so we can open a dialogue around what it means for women to have success in higher education, what are the challenges for career progression, what strategies they have been successfully applied in practice, and especially how can we promote gender equality in higher education institutions. So to understand more about these issues, we are joined today by Dr. Katrina O'Sullivan from Maynooth University. She is award-winning academic whose works explores barriers to education. Katrina leads the STEM Passport for Inclusion, award-winning project featured recently on RTE Changemaker series. She teaches in Maynooth human development and research methods, and her research focuses on equality and equity in education and employment. We also have today Dr. Helene Mihigo. She's research scientist at Pfizer. Helene, she moved to Ireland in 2008 and completed a bachelor degree in pharmaceutical and biomedical chemistry in Maynooth University, and later a PhD in medicinal chemistry from TCD. She's the founder of the annual STEM conference for researchers of Black and African descent in Ireland. And our third panelist is Dr. Claire McKean, who works at the WIRI Institute of Art, Design and Technology. She chairs the IEDT's Atenas One self-assessment team and the Preventing Sexual Violence and Harassment Working Group. And she's also the sectoral chair of the Atenas One Practitioners Network. She's a social scientist and a former Irish Research Council scholar. She has published extensively in the topic of gender politics and electoral politics in Ireland. So our event today, how are you going to proceed? We have this amazing panel, and I will be posing some questions to our guests. So we'll have a conversation for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll be opening the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, just type them in the chat box, and we will have a look at them later. Okay, so my first question, and I think I'm going to start with Katrina. So my first question, Katrina, is about leadership in academia. So it's very common that female academics, they are told to wait for the perfect moment, this perfect moment to become a leader. So maybe after have children, after have a specific kind of post. So what are the challenges for female academics to reach leadership positions or senior position senior positions of leadership in Irish higher education? What are your views on that?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me along here. It's a real privilege to talk about this topic that I'm really passionate about, trying to empower women to succeed in academia. And there's a number of reasons. The first, and all of them are nothing to do with the women themselves. So that's just to say that firstly. I think anybody who goes into academia and stays, especially female, has amazing skills and qualities. So like in the list that I would have had, or I have, the first one for me, and it's a difficult one to talk about sometimes, is family commitments and care and responsibilities, and the clash between motherhood or caring and being a leader or progressing to leadership. So if you think about just the average age of someone who graduates from their PhD and then maybe goes into postdoc and then moves into academia, that usually clashes with around the time that we are to have children, because there is a clock ticking, and having to try and do them two things together is really challenging for women. And one thing that was brought up to me to talk about was actually just maternity leave and the support for that. So there's real challenges around supporting women who have care and responsibilities. One of the perceptions I would have made is that a lot of women who are successful in becoming leaders don't actually have children, or they don't have the care and responsibilities that other women might have. So that's a challenge. The other ones then, I suppose, is perception of female capabilities. So we definitely have this idea of what a leader looks like. And then we have this idea about what a female is, and they clash with each other. And I think there's this unconscious bias in men and women around what a woman is and what she should act like. And that's challenging. And the other piece then is that belief in yourself, which isn't actually to do with the women themselves, but like there's evidence that shows, you know, we need to be really sure that we're going to get the job before we apply for the job, whereas men are different in how they apply for leadership positions. So with all these things together, and then finally, one of the observations I would make is that we prioritize other things sometimes rather than the things that get us into leadership. So we would prioritize like administration, student welfare, these things that are really, really important to our jobs, but in the metric for success and leadership, they're not necessarily as valued as research outputs and research publications. So there's a whole mismatch of challenges that get in the way of women progressing to leadership. I don't necessarily have the solutions, but I know these are all problems.
Yeah, I couldn't I think I couldn't agree more with you, Katrina, especially. I mean, there is you just made a list of several points and they all very relevant. So and especially when we look at why and when women put themselves forward for promotion or for jobs, so they have very high expectations and a lot is expected from them. Claire, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything Katrina has said. And I guess for me, it's an interesting question, both theoretically and practically, I suppose, as an academic whose all of my academic work has been informed by feminist institutionalism. So looking at how institutions are gendered at the outset and how historical legacies kind of carry through even in more modern times. And it's a simplistic way of saying it, but it's true. I mean, our universities and our IoTs, because I work in the higher technological university sector now, you know, they were not designed for women to be leaders. They were designed with a man, a white man, often with caring responsibility, someone doing the care work for him at home, and he didn't have to worry about that. And those legacies are very hard to shake, actually. You know, again, to kind of, I'm probably just reflecting what Katrina has said, but there is the timing issue, you know, maternity leave, you know, the time when young scholars need to be building their you know, their postdoctoral experience, need to be publishing, need to be getting their teaching experience, doing their teaching and learning qualifications, all of these things that will help, but of course, as we know, will not guarantee an academic job because of precarity in the system. And we know that this is the time when women have children. These are childbearing age, and that in itself has created a kind of a very obvious but very hard to tackle actually disadvantage for women in the system. There then is the whole issue, of course, of mobility. You know, often academics are expected to be mobile, to travel internationally, to work, do your postdoc abroad. I mean, there's a reason why a Marie Curie fellowship, for example, is so prestigious in the system. And again, this will all disadvantage women, particularly those with caring responsibilities. I do think, though, change can happen. And we are seeing at leadership level, my old alma mater in Maynooth on Monday brought the women presidents together for the first time. There is now a majority of women presidents in our higher education system. So gender systems do change over time, but it's unfortunately a very slow burn. And that leadership level we're now seeing gender balance at leadership level, that still is not necessarily filtering down into lower academic grades, and particularly in STEM, where we have real gender imbalances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a comment on the number of female presidents in Irish universities. It has been amazing. If I'm not wrong, it's now 6 or 7.
Seven.
Seven. Yeah, so this is extremely good. So Ireland is doing very well in that particular element, but as Claire just mentioned, this is not trickling down to other positions. So Ellen, just moving to you, you are someone who actually left academia and is now working in industry. So can you share with us how is the issue of leadership in industry? What has been your experience so far?
Yeah, I think, like, just to kind of go off on what Claire and Katrina said, a lot of the reasons that they stated was a key reason why I personally moved away from academic kind of like situation or industry. So I, just speaking from my own personal experience, I would have been a person who was in a carer position. So a lot of the times, if you were going to conferences, if you want to go to do a postdoc somewhere else, you have to, you know, move out of your of your post, and that you leave a responsibility. And another thing, I think, just before I go on to industry, another thing that we might that I can speak from my own perspective and people that I know, is it comes to a situation, the mobility issue as well. If you're a person who has, like, say, like a residence in Ireland, but you don't have the kind of like the visa situation to allow you to move at a moment's notice as well. So that can also create barriers. It might be for like a small group of people in Ireland, but it's still a barrier for those people that I would personally be aware of. But then in terms of industry, so my move to industry of I think in a way there was no surprise that like I didn't meet a lot of people who look like me, because there's like, if we're going to speak on like an intersectionality, there's not like a lot of Black people who I would find in leadership position. I anticipated that, given kind of my experience in academia and just kind of living here for the last like 15 years. So, but in terms of like the number of women who I found in leadership positions, I will say that I was very pleasantly surprised. There is a good division and a good kind of like distribution of those roles in my department personally. So I say in industry, it looks certainly more positive than I experienced in industry in terms of like women being in leadership positions.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting to know. It's not usually a discussion that we do. Like as early career academics, we are constantly told that we should consider a move to industry.
Yeah.
And it's not very common to have a contact with academics who actually left and how they're doing. So I'm glad to know that this is being positive for you.
Yeah, so far, yeah, it has been quite positive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Okay, so thinking about gender awareness in higher education. So in the past few years, I think we have had many discussions, or we have been encouraged to have more discussions about issues of bias in academia. So how to do recruitment process that they are more inclusive, so that we can take into consideration gender, age, ethnicity, and disability, for example. So we have a lot of training sessions. We have awareness weeks in our universities. But how has diversity and inequality changed in the past 5 years? What would be your views on that? And I think I would like to start with Claire, if you can comment on that.
Oh, absolutely huge. I've been working kind of in the sector since 2017 in the EDI space. I mean, Athena Swan has been around since 2015, which I'm sure everyone knows. For anyone who doesn't, Athena Swan is the gender equality accreditation framework in the sector. It's not perfect, but it has gone through a number of revisions processes in the past number of years to try and make it more inclusive, to be more intersectional in its approach. But also importantly now, HEIs are now being required to commit to a particular level of resource allocation to leadership, to governance and accountability structures in Athena Swan. And that's what was missing, I suppose, in previous iterations of the Charter. I mean, on top of Athena Swan, then there has been sectoral movement. There has been now 3 reviews of gender equality in sector. Probably one of the most significant changes to come from that second review, or what was called the 2018 Gender Equality Task Force, was the SALI post, the Senior Academic Leadership Initiative, which were kind of colloquially known as the women-only professorship posts. And that has had a change across the sector. And I think that was recognised on Monday, even by the women presidents who spoke in Maynooth. It has opened up more opportunities for women at senior levels. It has created, I would say, more of a gendered consciousness, I think, for women leaders at the top. We're seeing that happen more and more. They're much more aware of the fact that, you know, they have a gender and they're more willing to speak about these issues. But again, as I've said, it hasn't filtered down the levels. Precarity remains an issue. There are, you know, very real blocks in the system, particularly from lecturer to senior lecturer, from senior lecturer to prof. Those who can't get a contract are, say, hourly paid staff in the system. So there is a lot of work to do there. There's also, I suppose, two other things, you know, conversations that are happening sectorally, being driven by Athena Swan and these sectoral reviews. And one is actually, and there's actually a comment in the chat about this very issue, and I completely agree. So a lot of the EDI work in our institutions is currently being undertaken by women. And that often will put a burden or a kind of a disadvantage on women, but particularly women from underrepresented and minoritized groups. So we need to be very careful that we are A, not burdening those women, and B, at the same time, recognizing that these are often usually the experts in the field, and thus, you know, need to be allowed and enabled to do this type of work. So a lot of institutions are talking about, and some are now more successfully doing than others, is embedding EDI work into the promotions process for academics. So if you have EDI work done, that is formally being recognized in process. In my own institution, we don't have an academic promotion scheme like the universities, because we're in the IoT TU space, but what we've actually done in IDT, and I'm particularly proud of this actually, I have to say, is that all entrants coming into IDT to do an interview, every single person, whether you're coming in as a research assistant, a caretaker, right up to the president, everybody is asked an EDI question at interview. So we're now actually measuring that as a core competency in the interview process. So I think those kinds of things are really important. They reward this type of work, and they embed it as core to our institutions. Another area, and I might talk about this again later if I get a chance, but I'm really heartened to see that there's now a focus on sexual violence prevention in our institutions as part of the EDI framework, because we know that unfortunately that has been a barrier to women. So there, what I would see kind of as some of the big changes in recent years coming from Athena Swan and kind of sectoral guidance, I guess.
Yeah, Claire, that was a very good coverage of several key points. Something I saw about Sally these days was that there isn't enough applications from senior females. Do you know about it? And
that is true. That is true. I'm aware of, I suppose, because some of the, so Sally and I was involved at one of the applications a number of years ago. They have to be about gender equality at senior levels, but they're very highly impactful research posts. So they have to be written in such a way that, you know, at its heart, it's promoting excellent science in a broad sense that happens to be undertaken by a woman leader. And because in some of the science disciplines in particular, now Katrina probably knows more about this than I do, because in some of the science disciplines, they're so male dominated that when a woman applies and is successful, these women are then getting retention offers from their own universities, often in the UK and Europe. That's my anecdotal sense of what's going on. It's been a little bit easier to fill them in the humanities because we know women are better represented there, but it's often that the women get retention in their own institutions.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Katrina, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear what Claire was saying there, and I'm not going to disagree that I think we are really good in Ireland at policy, and I think we're really good at planning and we're really good at policy. But the implementation of the policy is where we fall down. And so when we ask the question, you know, how has it changed over the last 5 years? I think we've developed a lot more measures, and we're implementing a lot more activities where we're aiming to become more diverse. So for example, the Athena Swan, you know, the requirement for it, but there is also that question of who takes responsibility for that. And who's being, you know, there's a lot of administration attached to the policies and practices around Athena Swan or diversity in any way. And what we see is that women are primarily leading them initiatives, which is then taken away from the things that we're promoted on, which the reality is, and I loved what Claire said about trying to have EDI in a promotion category, but the reality is, you know, academia, we generally promoted on in our institution anyway, your research and your research output and your income are the primarily things that you're being promoted on. And therefore, the policies that are being implemented around Athena Swan and all the other initiatives, which are wonderful, sometimes I worry that they're having a negative impact upon the people who are taking the lead in them. So as a woman myself who comes from a diverse background, like I'm really a working class woman, come from a minority in that sense, but we don't even talk about class sometimes in terms of EDI because it's a hidden It's a hidden diversity. But I would say, so in the last 5 years, we're talking a lot more. The Sally professorships are wonderful in some ways, but that high bar in terms of like having to prove that you're so excellent, it's like going for an ERC in some cases. It's like, oh, well, we're only going to give these now because these women have to be absolutely amazing in their area. The reality is most women I know are amazing because they're carrying so many different challenges. I just think the high bar of the Sally professorships is questionable to me, in the sense that why have we made it so difficult, and why do women have to prove themselves so much for these wonderful opportunities? The other thing that I think has changed is we all have VPs now for EDI. So it is very transparent. There is conversations going on, and I think they will then hopefully transmit into action. But I worry that we're not taking enough action, and the people who are taking responsibility for the actions, what's happening to their careers. So for example, you know, do we have funding for people to be bought out of their posts for Athena Swan? That's fundamental, I think, in an institution, if we really have that. And it's not consistent across universities. Yeah, we're being forced to participate in Athena Swan now because we can't get funding for it. So there's this unconscious thing that happens that's worrying in my fit. Now, I'm not anti Athena Swan. I think it's really important that we have these conversations. It's transparent and we're measured. But who at what cost?
Yes. Thank you, Katrina. Yes, those were very relevant reflections, and I couldn't agree more with you. Helen, do you want to comment about that in your experience, maybe from the time you were still in academia? And I know that you have been very close to the Black African community in Ireland. So from your experience, are things changing somehow? What has been your experience?
So I think, so I'm like very, very early on in my career. So I would kind of like be more on the perspective of seeing how things have changed rather than being involved on changing things actually. So from my perspective, I do think that there is a lot of things that have kind of shifted, maybe not like entirely changed, but shifted in a slightly more positive way. From like say for example, in the EDI and the Athena Swan, I think a lot of people do view it as a box ticking exercise for some universities, and some other universities are excellent at carrying out the issues. But the one thing that I can say that would be positive about it is, even if it's a box ticking exercise, the things that get ticked on the box actually have to be done. So in terms of introducing things like sexual awareness and like abuse on campuses and all these things. So there has been way more awareness over it from when I would have been an undergrad to all the way when I finished my PhD. So that time, like, we did see certain shifts, and I think a lot of that would be attributed to things like Athena Swan. And then I say from like an industry perspective, there has been more focus on a lot of places, I think, to introduce a lot of like support groups in different industries where they have like women in engineering or women mentoring groups where they have more focus on encouraging and supporting women. And then they would have open like support groups for like people in the LGBTQ community. Then you have like Black and ethnic minority groups. These allow for an open space for people to be able to meet and discuss. And I don't know if these would have been kind of things that would have been available, like say 5-10 years ago. And these are coming in as more discussions are being opened up about all these minorities over the last few years. So in conclusion, I'll just definitely say that it's been more of a shift positively than like a huge change, which you can say quantify or something like that.
Thank you, Helene. I couldn't agree more when you mentioned the supporting groups, because they have been very useful. And I say this in a personal capacity, like having people like women in research close to me. So we have this space where we can discuss issues that affect us, and also the Association for Irish Researchers as well. It has been very helpful. So having this kind of support group, it's extremely useful. And professionally, you are in contact with other colleagues. So it really helps you to understand that in most cases, in the vast majority of cases, you are not alone, so that your colleagues are facing similar situations and someone can give you some very useful advice. So what you were mentioning there about the supporting groups is actually connected to my next question. So I think, Helene, I'm going to continue with you because already on this topic. So when you think about bias in academia, so what kind of help have been there in your experience that they were helpful to you? So you mentioned the supporting groups that you have been part of, but can you think about any institutional support that was relevant or something that you'd like to see implemented that would help to make a difference for us to fight discrimination in Irish academia?
So I think one of the key reasons why myself and my friend Yemi started the conference, which we put on every year, was having more open discussion, more uncomfortable, like very uncomfortable open discussions about race. In our case was race, and this was kind of like birthed after the events in 2020 where there was like the killing of George Floyd. So being able to have the conversations that we don't want to have, that would be definitely something that I think would be very helpful in everybody wanting, wanting and allowing themselves to be uncomfortable in that space. And I think I suppose for me, I would speak from the perspective of like people like young in their careers, is having those these support groups. So these support groups I speak of is like, we have them in Pfizer. We didn't have them in an academic space. We had to create those. There wasn't necessarily a lot of support from above to be able to tell us, okay, if you have you can have this space and you can discuss these issues, and we will be able to support you, and we will be able to bring in people who can help support you. So I remember us asking a therapist or a psychologist to come in just to have a discussion so we can talk about mental health. But that was an initiative that we were kind of bringing on. Eventually, like, academics started to catch on, and it started becoming a thing that we were like, they acknowledged that was a hugely important discussion to have. So from a student perspective or a young researcher perspective, is allowing these open spaces which older or more senior academics will allow themselves to be involved in, and will allow themselves to be as uncomfortable discussing this as we are living in these truths and these realities. So.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And do let us know when the next conference is happening, so we can help to advertise that. It would be great. So just because I'm aware of the time, I'd like to move to the next question, which is what is the meaning of having success in academia as a female? So is this about career progression, job satisfaction, personal achievements, I don't know, publications, funding, or maybe it's a mix of everything? So we are told that we should pursue these levels of success so we can advance in our careers, but what's the meaning of success in your views? And Katrina, I'd like to start with you.
This was an interesting question. So I read it in a different way. So I read doing it all. I wrote down doing it all, which is a really bad thing to have thought. But I perceived the question of, like, as a successful academic, how did I do it? And like someone wrote in the chat there, Nithya, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, about she's doing her PhD and she's left her son at home and she's come here to do the PhD in DCU, and she was asking if there's anybody else. And I was thinking about, like, I had my third son when I was in my first year of my PhD in Trinity, and I didn't take a break because of, I don't know, I didn't, it wasn't encouraged. I didn't think I could. I was getting a stipend. So I just carried on, and I put him in a creche really young and spent a lot of time away from him. And so I was considering kind of the cost to success when I read this question. So I wrote down doing it all, having no life, sacrificing. It also means, so I think for me, my measure of success is actually trying to empower other women to come through and support them as much as I can. So, but I know in the back of my head that I have to publish and I have to get research grants in order to do the things that I actually give me the feeling like I'm doing something meaningful and the reason why I'm in this game. So there's this kind of clash between what I think is success in higher education and research, which is informing the world and making a positive impact. That's why I do research, is because I want to make things better in the area that I've chosen to specialize in. But in order to do that, I have to do all these other jump through hoops things, which are really arduous at times and really costly to my life. So success is complicated. It is generally, and also I'm just going to be honest, like, I know that having a publication in a high impact journal will give me respect in a room where that's all they care about in academia. And so therefore sometimes, like, success, I know that that's what I have to do to be successful, if you know what I mean. I don't know if I'm complicating it for people, but like, for me, success would be and should be contributing to the area that I'm passionate about, being able to teach other students and bring them along and support them in their endeavors. And also then being able to lead too in an area that I want to. The reality of my success doesn't look like that. It looks like sacrifice, spending a lot of time doing a lot of stuff that I don't really enjoy, being away from my family a good bit, and also then trying to like keep that balance going at all times. Sorry if I'm not selling this gig to everybody, but
no, that's very good, Katrina. You were speaking about the trade-offs, like that to achieve some kind of success, especially the ones that are measurable, like funding and publications. You need to sacrifice a lot, and especially because we do a lot of work, as you mentioned before, and also Claire, that it's invisible, like that pastoral care of students, supervision, and so many other things. Claire, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I might give a personal answer to this and maybe then a more theoretical one. I guess for me, it's an interesting one as somebody who works in a senior leadership position in third level, was an academic, a precariously employed academic myself for a number of years. I made the decision to leave that. And I also, when we talk about intersectionality, I'm a woman I live with a chronic illness as well, that I have to manage my stress, or if not, that will flare up on me. So if you would ask, I'm 35 this year, if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I probably would have given you a very different answer, actually. I probably would have told you, you know, I wanted to do it all. I wanted to be a senior lecturer by the time I was 35, and what I didn't want to do. Now, for me personally, success is where I take satisfaction in a job that I love, where I feel that I can make an impact in some way. And, you know, again, the personal side of it, in my job, I'm very privileged. I get to work with an amazing group of students, in particular, a group of creative, artistic students who make EDI work actually very easy to do locally. And so for me, and I get to do my own research kind of on the side, kind of as a hobby now in my own time. So for me, at a personal level, I've reached a level where for success, this is what success to me looks like. I can manage my time, I can do what I love to do and feel I can make a little bit of a difference. On a more theoretical side, though, to do more relation to women's academia, academic success more generally, you know, one fear I do have a little bit around, and I don't want to take away from active research culture and from the importance of research, but, you know, the core teaching that her HEIs do every day, and women have often been to the forefront of that. And I suppose I would like to see systems where, you know, the promotional criteria, you know, retains a focus on teaching, you know, to a certain degree, or allows for that flexibility in the system, that we don't move away from that area where women have often had very, very big success. And this comes back to, I suppose, to pastoral care. Often it's women lecturers and women tutors doing a lot of that pastoral care with students. And again, just ensuring that is recognised in an attempt to help women move up the academic career ladder, if that makes sense. So, but again, from a personal point of view, I think probably where I am now, I guess I would probably measure as some metric of success, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
Felt like a ramble.
There are many ways to understand success, so that's why I thought it was a good idea to ask this question. So, Helene, do you want to comment on what success looks like for you?
Yeah. So I wrote down that it's like it would be to be acknowledged as a person rather than just on my gender or my race. But then at the same time, and then I had a thought at the same time of those things do contribute to my success because I have to kind of keep going and keep doing in spite of them. So I don't know. I think it's like I'm too young in my career to be able to define success for myself. But I do hope that it would be defined without having to say, oh, Helen, the woman, or the Black such, that I think that would be something that I would define as success.
Yes, that's very good, Helen. Thank you so much. So I think I have one question, and this involves the context of the pandemic, or this post-pandemic context. So we knew that during the pandemic there was a disproportionate strain of female academics, and research has already told us that universities they were able to implement some kind of actions. So, for example, to make sure that women, they would not lose their tenure, or that they keep going with promotion applications, and especially to make sure that diversity in higher education would continue. So now that we are in this post-pandemic scenario, what supports do you think that were created during the pandemic that they should stay, or that for sure that they have stayed? So were they beneficial in some way? So Katrina, can you comment on that?
I will. When I was thinking about this, I suppose like I didn't really see any supports in terms of COVID that were explicit to me anyway. Within that, we talked a lot about it, and there was definitely like my research looked at, I suppose, women and the impact of COVID on women, and the second shift, or the fourth shift rather than the second shift, because like there's so much more than just 2 shifts that women do generally, and the impact that had on. So I didn't really see that many. So maybe other institutions had more explicit. In mine, I didn't see, and it might not have been that they weren't there. It just didn't affect me. Like I went for promotion during COVID time, so it didn't really affect me that much. One thing though that I have and I worry about in terms of the impact of COVID is the working from home culture, which I know I'm not liked for saying this, because I'm not an advocate of moving towards working from home for everybody, and it's not because I don't think that it should be done, but I worry that a lot of women are happy to be working from home because it means that they can engage in things like getting the washing done, picking the kids up from school, and there's this benefit to it that is actually might be in the end a loss to career progression. So I didn't really see that many benefits in terms of our activities. And if we look at the outcomes for women during them times, our production in terms of our research outputs were significantly negatively impacted. And I don't think then there were interventions that supported us to stay, fully engaged in the research process. And we continued to increase our administration loads during that period as well. So I didn't see that many, and I worry about working from home. Please don't shoot me when I say that though. I don't like the idea of women thinking this is a great thing because they can do all the other jobs that they're putting off for when they get home from work. I just worry about that.
Yeah, it really might be just more work to be done, and having no separation between work and life at home. Claire, do you want to comment on that?
It's interesting. I would agree. I didn't see very many supports at all. And we spent an awful lot of time talking about them. So say at the EDI at sectoral level, I was in loads of meetings in the course of that year or 2 years where EDI leads, we would get together and we talk about the impact on women. But I never saw the universities and our other institutions ever actually respond in any. Now that's not to say there weren't other institutions that did, but certainly I did, and I've assessed lots of Athena Swan applications since COVID, the kind of the lockdown periods, and I've never really been overly convinced actually of anything substantive. I suppose the work from home for me thing, again, I'll give you a personal and a more theoretical answer. And for me, it was game changer. Again, as a woman, I see Rebecca Maguire, my old colleague, Rebecca and Maynooth. Hi, Rebecca. And for me, again, with someone who lives with a chronic pain, working from home for me was absolutely game changer and has remained for me really important part of my work-life balance, to be able to do that a couple of days a week. Like I don't know if you can see my background, but I'm at home today. I'll be in the office all day tomorrow. But actually, it's important to remember that higher education institutions are composed also of administrative staff who didn't often have a degree, maybe the same degree of flexibility that academics have always had. And I know, speaking to women admin staff, and actually it's a piece of research I'm actually really dying to do in the next couple of years, is to actually survey women administrators on their gendered experiences of our institutions, because they have other gendered issues. And I know for women administrators, anecdotally, that shift to working from home, that hybrid working flexibility has been quite important, because they didn't have that kind of flexibility, I guess, prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic kind of put that onto institutions. I'm not so convinced it would have happened. One thing on COVID, just one thing that kind of concerned me a little bit at the start of COVID, going back to academic work and progression. And I remember tweeting about this at the time, and this is probably the group maybe to just share my frustrations with. Does anyone remember at the start of COVID, and in every discipline, there was this rush, there was these fast-tracked journals or special issues to look at the impact of COVID. I remember in my own discipline of women in politics, and one of our main journals, within about a month of a pandemic being launched, and they were opening up special journal issues, with a very quick turnaround. And that in itself was disproportionately impacting of women at a very critical and key time. Schools were closed. And I often do wonder, often if you're the first published in a particular area, you're the one who naturally gets the citations if you build the theory and the findings first. And I often wonder what implication that will have down the line for women's citation. I don't know, that's just me putting that question out there, just a very particular, but no, I would agree there wasn't a huge amount of supports, but I do think it probably did maybe force institutions into something that they wouldn't have maybe done without it. But I could be wrong.
Just to answer you there, Claire, I was looking into this morning, actually. COVID actually magnified the less citations for females.
Yeah.
Actually, so already we're, I think, 33% or something, we're cited like at 33%, and COVID actually reduced that. So I was looking into that this morning. Really? So definitely there was a male response to these early issues that were really beneficial for them.
That's really interesting. And Katrina, I know I appreciate that in the STEM fields, even the IRC put out this really quick COVID call. I don't know if anyone remembers that. And you had to apply within 6 weeks. But when you see journals like, Women, Politics and Polity and Gender and Society, that is so interesting. And
it was across the board, so it wasn't just them. So it was
everyone.
Yeah,
everyone.
So it was everywhere.
And there was kind of a subdiscipline of kind of COVID studies built into all of our disciplines. I just think it was such an interesting, and no one kind of stood back and thought about it. That's really interesting. You have the stats though.
I think we should hope that by now people are kind of stepping back and looking at their publications, because I remember one particular publication, which was a book that was published in less than 30 days. In the middle of the pandemic, and I was just like, how can someone publish a book, like a whole book, so fast? And it was a guy in the US, and he did it, but the quality of the publication, of course, now we can question. But at the time, he was being hailed as someone who was doing very good work and working really fast. So that was something that was key at the time. So I think I'm now moving to our final questions, and
sorry, could I just say, there is I agree with a lot of the pretty much everything that Katrina and Claire said, but I think there's another perspective to the work from home situation, and that perspective is for people with disabilities. So I say from the perspective of industry, obviously, there's a lot of people who started working differently and probably even better from being allowed to work from home because of daily commute, of spaces that weren't well suited for them. So say, for example, neurodivergent people who were able to work in spaces that they could control. So while I think in academic spaces, it might have been like a setback, I do think that the work from home situation did allow room and space for so many other disenfranchised people who didn't have the space to begin with. So there is definitely like, it's more of a two-edged sword, if you will. Like
Yeah.
there's
I
people
totally agree. And I'm not trying to say that it isn't great for some people. So
Yeah.
if I come across like that, I don't mean that, because even in our own department, I know, like, as I know it's very beneficial. I just worry about the care and responsibility piece, that it's like an opportunity to do more at home. And so that was the bit that I was kind of commenting on. Not that I don't think it was good for some people, and I really agree with you. So if I didn't come across like that, I really apologize, because I know there's flexibility in it.
Yeah, I understand. I just kind of wanted to give the other perspective as well, that it is 100% such a beneficial thing that has made such a difference for a group of people who wouldn't have been able to work to begin with. And then with COVID, we all saw that it's possible. It's possible for people to actually get the job done at home, and they're able to support themselves now better than they ever could before. So, yeah.
Rebecca's disagreeing with me online as well, my own colleague. Thanks, Rebecca. Love you.
It happens with our best friends. Okay, so let's move to our final questions, because I would like to get some questions from the audience. So I asked each one of our speakers to tell us which women inspire them. So if they could share, for example, what are women that inspire them professionally? So not just in academia, but maybe politicians or journalists, and also that they could suggest some readings for us. So maybe a book, a podcast that that actually made the difference for them in terms to understand better about gender equality in academia. So Claire, can you share with us our impressions and recommendations?
I can. I mean, I have loads. I'm a very big reader, but I'll give you one. For those who haven't read it, Chanel Miller's Say My Name. So Chanel was Brock Turner's victim of sexual assault in Stanford. You may remember this case a number of years ago, a woman of color. And it is the most insightful, impactful, powerful. I read it at the height of the COVID lockdown, when I was doing a lot of work in my own institution around the consent framework and consent classes for students. And Chanel wasn't a student at Stanford, but had to go through Stanford's policies to make a complaint because it happened on their campus. And if you're going to read anything in this space, I highly, highly recommend you pick up a copy of Say My Name. I have a few others, but that'd be my main. In terms of people who have inspired me, I've never been one for role models, I have to say, but I am very lucky to have a very close group of kind of core women friends in academia and research. And I'll probably mention three. Dr. Pauline Cullen, who's a sociologist in Maynooth, has really been one of my main mentors, actually. She has just been a phenomenal support to me. Professor Linda Connolly, also in Maynooth, has been a very good mentor to me. And actually Valeska is a very good friend and colleague, and we've co-written together, and I would put her in that category of women who just continuously inspire me and are just very good sisters, to use that phrase as well.
I'm really honored. Thank you, Claire. Claire, can you just type the title of the book in the chat so people can try to find? So Helene, can you share with us?
Yeah, so I think for me, women who inspire me is women who inspire me to do better, and to make space for me better. And I would say some of those I would have to say the young woman Greta Thunberg. She's great. She speaks issues that are very important for people in my peer group. I would also say like Amanda Ade. She's a young Black Irish woman who is an advocate for young Black people, and she just speaks so well for us, and I'm really inspired by her. And I think more recently, myself as a child of war, if you will, I'm inspired by all the women in Iran who are fighting the good fight and hope that they can improve the situation for themselves. So I hope to be as helpful to them as I can. And then in terms of podcasts that I listen to, I love this podcast called Black Women Working. It is a wonderful podcast which kind of gives perspective of these 3 or 4 Black women who give their perspective about working in schools, in law firms, and so on and so forth, which it gives their experience. And I think I learned so much from them, because as a Black woman myself, I can see myself in them, and I learned how to deal with a lot of situations that are unfamiliar and mostly unfair from them. So yeah, I'm really grateful for them.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. Can you type the titles in the chat, Eileen, so people can try and find them on Google, perhaps? Katrina, it's your turn to share now.
I know this. Well, this is always a hard question. I'm inspired by most women that I meet, to be honest. My PhD student, Nesta, she's my first PhD, and just actually watching her grow, and she published her first lead author paper the other day, and just being part of that journey. It's so inspiring to me to actually be part of someone's journey and see that. But there's other women that are, like, I'm friends with Lynn Ruan, and I think I like women who are just, you know, the same. They stay the same. They have the same values and the views, and they keep to them, you know. So there's Dalma Byrne in Maynooth. She's been such a supporter to me over the years, but there's also men as well that have supported me in our. So we've a really great Professor Mac McLaughlin, who's very supportive and someone that I go to, but also Rebecca and Deirdre, loads of people. I suppose in terms of books, Girl, Women, Other is a really fantastic book. Bernadine Evaristo is a fantastic writer, and she talks about intersectionality, being a Black woman, and the challenges of this. And so, yeah, there's a woman of ethnic minority, and it's a really interesting read. In terms of podcasts, I said this earlier, I mean, I just get really frustrated by so many men on podcasts that, like, if I see another man on a podcast telling me his opinion, I think I'm going to break my phone. So in terms of podcasts, there's a really good new one called The New Gurus, which is really interesting. Elaine Burke's technology one. And I do like the Irish Times Women's podcast. So in terms of inspiring, like, I have loads of working class women in my life who are just like doing the do every day. I mean, like, getting up, trudging through life, like trying the best for their kids. And I suppose they're the ones that inspire me, you know, people who are like challenged and are just making the best of their lives for their families, that really inspire me. You're on mute.
Oops. Can you type those titles on the chat so people can find out them later? We'll be posting those on social media, so hopefully people will find them easily. Okay, so I think I don't have more questions for the panel, so now we can open the floor to the audience. Aideen, can you come in and please manage the question and answer session, please?
Yeah, sure. It's been a really great discussion, really enjoying listening in. There's quite a few questions, so hopefully we'll get through a few of them anyway. There was a question about how we might help women on maternity leave with their research groups, noting that as it stands, there are no such supports in place. It's a big issue. Maybe Sarah, if you might want to come in on that first.
Did you say Claire?
Yes, I did. Sorry.
Sorry, I don't know why in my head I thought you said Sarah, and I said, "Is there?"
I thought I got your name wrong.
No, you didn't. No, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a huge issue. It's probably something Katrina probably knows a little bit more about than I do, actually. I do think the funding bodies, Katrina, am I correct? Are the funding bodies now, have they got policies for those, say? No, still don't. There hasn't moved on.
I think it you know what, it's actually it's a really hard to be solved issue, because the female lead within the research group, if she's the one that holds a lot of the knowledge and expertise, and then so it's very difficult to replace her within the and so we've just got a paper published on this particular topic, like women leaders in academia and what the impacts of. There isn't a solution out there, and I personally don't know what it is. I think it's a really giving people space and time out of work is really important for maternity leave, and having that explicitly stated. But when someone is in charge of a lab, It's very, very difficult. And I don't know, it's complex. I don't know, I haven't got the answer to that. It's very rare for me to not have an opinion on something. I don't know what can be done for that. I think it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had though, because it's very challenging. There's women I know who are currently struggling because they have responsibilities within the lab for PhD students, for postdocs, and it's I don't know what the solution is, and I haven't seen a workable one at this point.
Yeah,
Okay.
just to go back in, that would have been my, I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I remember the IRC were in some discussion, but that's exactly what it came back to. I remember there were big discussions about policies for PhD students, and yeah, it's just a particularly difficult nut to crack.
I suppose the next question kind of related potentially in some ways, is there any funding calls in STEM for women researchers only? And maybe this is where these considerations need to be made. Katrina, do you know?
You see, there's always pushback against women only anything. And the argument is always, oh, well, women wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't want that, or so no, there is priority. So there's targets even in SFI, and SFI publish on they have their metrics around how many women receive research grants from them, but targeted for women only. Apart from the Sally professorships in terms of research grants, I haven't seen them. And there's always a conversation around quotas and challenges around that idea that comes up when you have them conversations. I definitely think, now there are female only, like industry, there's an industry that do female only grants, but I don't know if there's national ones. I haven't seen national ones, and there's always a pushback around national having gender only grants. Maybe Claire might know more on that. I haven't seen them.
I don't. The only ones I've seen would be kind of at local level. Some universities might have women in STEM PhD scholarships, for example. I think the John and Pat Hume, Katrina, maybe even locally for either there's a women, and there used to be certainly one dedicated to specifically put aside for women in physics, chemistry, etc. But other than that, no. More common in industry.
Okay, perfect. And the next question I might put to you, Helene, somebody's moved from academia to industry. Do you have any thoughts or experience of imposter syndrome, especially when applying for or starting a new role?
Yes. I think I've spoken about this to length. I think even to every therapist I've ever spoken to. Get a therapist, by the way, if you don't have one. They're great. I've spoken about it at length, and I think it's just one of those things that doesn't go away. I remember when I first started my PhD, and obviously, you know, to get a PhD, you have to get certain marks and you have to do the application, which is lengthy, and they don't just give those to you because of a mistake or anything like that. You actually have to earn it. But I remember spending the first year of my PhD being like, I am a fraud. I'm a fraud. How did I get here? I'm a fraud, completely fraud. And I remember the first 3 months of my job, I was like, I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud. I don't, how did they hire me? This was obviously accidental. So I think a lot of it is, it's one of the things I've learned is just to learn to sit in your uncomfortableness for that bit, allow yourself to experience it and realize that it wasn't a mistake, that there's a lot of checks and balances that had to be done before for you to get to where you are. So the imposter syndrome, I don't know if it goes away. So far, every time I start something new, it's still there. But I think the important thing is to acknowledge, yes, I'm feeling like I might not be the person for this. Allow yourself to feel it, and then eventually just get to work through it. But the important thing is to allow yourself to feel it. Don't push it away.
Can I just come in there? Just to say, like, I still feel that all the time, and as I'm more open, I'm open about my background, being working class or underclass, I wouldn't even necessarily say. And so, yeah, it's really difficult when you go into rooms and you know that other people haven't had the same experiences as you. And you talked about, it's very explicit for yourself in terms of ethnicity and race, but I think it contributes sometimes when there isn't diversity in the room or people are not open about diversity. It can facilitate feeling that imposter syndrome, because I am an imposter. I'm working in a space where there's not a lot of people that is the same as me. So then, you know, you do feel like an imposter, and so I still feel like that. And when I say that, people are like, oh my God, you're so successful. And look at all the things you're doing. Yeah, I still shit myself every time I go to do a presentation, I do a talk like this. I think, oh my God, they're going to find me out. It's going to happen. And like you said, I recommend therapy, but I also think that having a few women that I can just call and go, am I okay? Is really, really important. And you can't underestimate that and also having women who'll bump you up, you know what I mean? Like that will say, you know, you got this, your brilliance is really important. So finding your people is a really important piece of this, if you can. And if you haven't got any people, I'll be your people.
You know, I completely agree with that. I remember my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, was and still that person for me. Like I'll call her and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. She'll be like, Elena, you literally gave a talk yesterday. You're fine. We wrote a paper together last month. Yeah. You're fine. You know what you're doing. Because reality is you do know what you're doing. It's just you just kind of feel like a fish out of water because it's an environment where it's not necessarily made for you, but sometimes you're just pushing your way through it. And you being there in the first place is like the greatest success. So that's kind of how I've started to view it.
I might come in on this very quickly too, to say that I suffered with imposter syndrome very badly. I went to therapy myself too, but actually I don't mean this to sound as glib as I'm going to make it, but I'm actually finding myself more and more cured from it and more confident the more I work with senior male leaders in our institutions. And I don't mean that to sound the way it sounds, but actually you get a sense that, you know, everybody is just trying their best. They don't know any more than you do. In fact, you probably know 10 times more than they do, actually. And it's funny, I've actually found that to be quite remedying the more I work with men, in particular in leadership level.
Great answers there. I am just mindful of the time. It's just 5 past there. Maybe we have one more question. Is that okay?
Yeah, maybe one more and then we close. Thank you, Adine.
Perfect. So I've just picked out one question here. Any advice about how to respond to backlash when being told that you have probably been favoured on the basis of your gender and or race rather than in spite of it?
I might come in on this because actually most of my academic research has been on gender quotas, and this is in politics, and this has been something that women politicians have faced for a long time. The meritocracy isn't real. Our institutions are not beacons of meritocracy. No institution is. As I said at the start, they have been created by white men, white middle-class able-bodied men for other white middle-class able-bodied men. So my advice to anyone, I've had women politicians ask me this question over the years too, is always to come back and say, well, who is merited? It simply doesn't exist. And I think we have to, I mean, it should exist and we should be moving towards those systems. We will never have merited systems whilst inequality exists and while lack of opportunities exist. And I think that is often the way just to come back with that, just, whether it's sarcastically or seriously, come back and say, well, actually, like, can you tell me what merit is? So what would merit look like in the system? I often find we'll shut that question down quite quickly.
I would just tell them to shut up. I would genuinely just say, yeah, it's great, isn't it? Isn't it great that we're getting, women are finally getting something in the system? And then I know but that's just me because I am an arguing person who would just have the balls to say that. The other thing that you could possibly say is it would be really helpful if you would maybe read about equality, diversity and inclusion issues before you make comments about how I got here, and then just never talk to that person again and hope that they dwell in a miserable hole of inequality somewhere and you never have to meet them again.
I think I'll probably be similar to Katrina. I would probably tell you to shut the hell up. Sorry about that now. I wouldn't be the kind of person who will just take it on the chin and move on. I will probably make it my mission to prove you wrong every time. But I think a lot of those things it's not usually explicitly said to you. It's usually kind of shown to you that people feel that way. So a lot of how I choose to respond to it is by similar actions. If you're going to treat me like you don't think that I'm deserving of being here, for me is I worked really hard to be here, whether it was because someone else, someone had to like choose me to be here for diversity quota, which I don't think those are things that exist, because like if they were, I would be in very different places. I've been rejected in many different places, so I don't know. So for me, it would definitely be more action from your part, rather and will probably like, get you in less trouble. Let's be honest. So yeah.
And sometimes, you know what, like just to finalize, add a comment to this. You mentioned this not long ago about having hard conversations. Like lots of people think that stuff and don't say it. So when someone says it, it's probably a good learning opportunity for that person. And it's something to be aware that people think it whether they say it or not anyway. So like there is something to be said about a person who actually has the audacity to speak and say the thing that may be on the mind of others. So there is an opportunity maybe for learning for that person if we can, you know, get over how offensive it is.
Okay, so thank you. It was our last question, really just because of the time. I have the feeling that this conversation could go on for another hour if we had time. So I just want to thank you for these enlightening discussions, for your amazing advice and recommendations. So Claire, Helene, Katrina, thank you so much. I also would like to say thank you to the WIRI committee who has been supporting this event today, and also to thank my colleagues at DCU, my co-workers and the students that they're here en masse. I'm very happy to see them here. So you can follow us on Twitter and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see our handle there on the chat. So keep in touch. We will be doing the upload of this discussion on our YouTube account later today or tomorrow. So I will share the link in our social media. So thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon, and hopefully we see each other soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
That was great, Alaska.
Thank you, Kathy. It was really good. I think everything was fine in the chat.
No issues in the chat.
Okay, great.
There was, I think, a high